Hi, my name is Madai Bernal. I'm a student at UNG and I'm currently a junior in the College of Education program. And this is my Ardenti story. I first learned about Ardenti when Jennifer Young came to one of my classes. She was trying to recruit. As soon as I was off of that classroom, I got on my computer, I did the research, and then I applied for it, and then I got the scholarship. And then when I came home, I told my parents, hey, I'm going to Belize. So it wasn't really like I was asking for permission, I was just informing them. And they were pretty taken away from it because they hadn't even heard of the trip before. It just happened so out of the blue. It was something that I didn't know I wanted, but once I heard it, I was like, oh, that's really for me. Because in my senior year of high school, we had this project called Be the Change, where we were supposed to pick a topic and figure out a way that we could make a positive impact on it, whether it be in the community or maybe even the world. And the topic I chose was the impact that war had on children. It was a very brutal research. It was a bit brutal because I spent a lot of hours reading individual stories about kids who have grown up in conflict, and it went from malnourishment, lack of education, being used as a way to get to a parent who angered another group, being used as suicide bombers, and it was very devastating. And during those days, I would go to school and I would look at my building and picture how would that building look like if a bomb had suddenly fallen on it, and it was very devastating. At the end of that, I started to wrongly sympathize with the children, and it didn't help that most of the conflicts were in the global south, which already has a lot of connotations. And I knew it wasn't the proper mindset to have, but it's hard not to. I expected that this trip could help change my perspective, especially towards the global south, but also in communities in my own country that are perhaps less privileged than I am. And it really was. The first day that we were there, we settled into the Red Hut Inn, and then we went snorkeling for a while. There was a tour guide with us. Her name was Natalie, and she was very good friends with Jennifer. Natalie did an amazing job with the excursions. She was very awesome. She was very lively. It was really cool having her there. She, at some point, honestly, didn't feel like she was a guide. She obviously was very knowledgeable, but it just felt like she was just a person in the group with us who just happened to know a lot of things. She really felt like she was with us. Snorkeling was very, very rewarding. I felt like I used to have a fish tank, like a very decorated fish tank, and it literally felt like someone just made a giant fish tank and we just sort of like were going over it. I don't know how to swim, so I usually, when I'm in a pool, I don't gravitate far from the 5-foot area, and then there I was in the middle of the ocean with nothing but a floaty. It's not something I ever saw myself doing, but I really enjoyed it. It was really cool. When I sent the pictures to my parents at night of the sharks, they were very, very disappointed. They were very scared. It's not something I ever thought I would do, but at the end, it was super rewarding. I really, really enjoyed it. It was a beautiful sight. And then we went to the Keycocker Island and explored there for a bit. We ate a restaurant by the sea, and that food was also amazing. Since most of the food there was seafood, and one of the guys, Jacob, he ordered, I forgot what he ordered, but it was some kind of fish, and they served him like a whole fish, and that was cool to see. And yeah, it was really, really good food. Keycocker was fun. At some point, we went around looking for souvenirs, and then Jonathan, a person from our group, separated from us for a while. And then when he came back with us, he was holding a coconut. I don't know why, but for some reason that moment was very funny to me, and it just showed like, oh, we're in Belize. On Monday was the first day that we went to the Unity School, and because of COVID, this was the first time that the kids were coming to school after a year-long break. So we didn't really know what to expect from them. We didn't know who would attend. And we ended up getting about 10 students the first day. What we did was that we divided the students among ourselves, and we would tutor on them. If we could, it would be one-on-one, but if too many came, then we would do maybe like 3 students for 1 teacher. And that's how we worked for the first couple of days, maybe 3 days we worked like that. Sometimes kids would bring packets, and we would work on the packet with that student. COVID had some pretty big effects on the Unity School. For one, the school wasn't running for a whole year, and most of that work was in packets. And the packets were quite presumptuous on the knowledge that the students already had. So if the students were missing the basics, it was impossible for them to complete it because they were missing the blocks to do so. And the directions that the packets provided were meant for the parents more than they were for the students. And if the parents were absent, or if they couldn't read, perhaps a language barrier, or maybe the education, if they couldn't read it, then it was even more difficult for the students to complete the packet. What I tried to do was try to get the student to understand the basics so he could then later complete the packet at home. I think it's a good example of how the career in education is in general, because those first 3 days was a bit of a struggle because, like I said, we didn't know what to expect. But by the 4th day, we were finally getting the gist of it. It started off as a small idea. Me and some of the people in my group were saying that it would be cool if we got the kids together for about 30 minutes and then separating them. But the more we talked about it, started forming into this much bigger thing where we would do centers, and each group or each of my peers would be in charge of a center. So we had math, we had reading, we had writing, we had a computer center. We would divide the students by grade level because different kids were coming in from different grade levels, so it was a bit hard to work with them sometimes. So we decided to separate them by either grade level or just where we felt that they would be at. And since the first 3 days, we had been working with about 3 students for a whole entire day. We each got a feel for the students' level, which was really a really amazing opportunity because you don't get that in classes. When you're working with 30 students, it's hard for you to understand the need of every student because there's 30 of them. But here we had the opportunity to really get the feel of each student. So what we did was that we would talk to each other and fill each other in where we thought that certain students were at, so that then they could adjust their center to the kids' needs. And that was really awesome, but it sucked because as we were getting it, we had to go, which is, I think, a very good example or demonstration of how the education career is. So you got to feel for that. But the goal for Ardenti is to repeatedly come in and visit the children. So maybe that progress that we had can be maintained. I think that an important part in education is person-to-person interaction. So when COVID happened and the school was forced to close down, it impacted their education quite a bit. And we could see that when we went in there, because about the 2nd day that we were there, I had a student come in. His name was Kareem. And he was a very shy kid. He was very quiet at first. And he brought a packet with him, so we started working on that packet. And I don't know, you just got this energy from him that he didn't really want to be there. And so I started kind of diverting away from the packet where I was still focusing on the subjects that were there, but I was moving to more hands-on activities. And by the end of it, he had opened up more and he was even laughing a couple of times, which was very cool to see. And at the end of the day, he told me that he wanted to come back tomorrow. And he asked me, like, will you guys still be there? Oh, okay, then I'll come back tomorrow. So that really shows how person-in-person interaction, how valuable it is and how it can impact the way kids perceive education and perhaps perform as well. One of the main subjects that we focused on was literacy, mainly literacy, and not just spelling, but also grammar. There was almost all the packets that they had were the same. And one of the packets really was trying to emphasize possessive adjectives. So like her lamp, his lamp, and stuff like that. And so what I would end up doing, I almost did this with all of the students because each day I intended to get different students. I would get a block and put it in the middle of the table. And I made them put their hands like flat on the table. Then I would count to 3 and we'd all rush in to get it. And then a student would have to make a statement, like, who does the block belong? The block belongs to her, the block belongs to me, the block belongs to you. And I ended up doing that basically with all of the students. And then with some of the ones who were more in the lower grades, we focused more on alphabets and some word families. We did that with these little blocks that they had, alphabetical blocks. We would make words from them. It was It was a different experience having students who spoke multiple languages, or perhaps a different language than I did. There was a student in our group and he only spoke Krill, and it was a bit challenging because sometimes he would ask me stuff and I tried my best to figure it out. Sometimes I could because I recognized some Spanish and English in there, but it was a bit hard. And then when I talked, I'm not really sure if he understood me. So that was a little bit hard, but luckily there were some other students there who understood what he was saying. So we had a bit of like a translator. And yeah, it was a bit difficult, but we adapted. A difference in teaching the students at Unity and then the students in America was that their education over there has been disrupted more. So although you see that they're at a certain level, they might not have certain foundations. Like, I would get a student who seemed like he was in the 3rd grade or somewhere around there. And when I would start teaching, I would teach with my assumptions of, what a 3rd grader should probably already know. But usually when I try to teach the same material that I would teach an American student, ended up being a bit too advanced. And so I had to take away all the prior knowledge I had of what a 3rd grader should know and try to focus on just what this person knows, which is a bit difficult, but luckily we had one-on-one time with a student, which made that process way easier because we could really just focus on that one student. In American schools, something that we see a lot is the use of whiteboards. And to see a classroom without a whiteboard, where do we start? Because we've just integrated our education process a lot with the use of technology, and them not having that was a bit difficult. And the videographer who was with us, Jonathan, he brought along his computer, and it was a small computer, but even that seemed to really impact the kids, and that at least brought some familiarity because teaching with technology for us is very normal. It's something that we do a lot, but for them it was very exciting and new, and they absolutely loved it. So it's interesting to see their reaction, because if we were to give a computer like that in a regular elementary student classroom, they would not really think much of it. To them, really, it's like a touch whiteboard. Now that might be a bit impressive, although nowadays even that might be normal. But to them, that small computer was super cool, and it was something that they looked forward to playing with. In traditional classrooms is one teacher with 30 students. I've never actually been in that atmosphere. So starting off with Belize, where we worked with only one student at a time, it made me realize how important that one-on-one time is. And so if there's some way, it's a bit hard because like I said, it's a lot of students. If there's some way to implement that intimacy between a single student and a teacher into a class with 30 people, doing this student service learning, it has at least given me the motivation to at least try to find a way to make it work, because it has showed me how successful it is, and not just academically, but also with a kid, how impactful it can be in their lives, how it can really help. Many of us came to this program hoping to make an impact on the community, or perhaps one kid at least, and I think that by the end of it we all got that, because like I said earlier, the attendance was fairly low, so we were able to give individual attention to the students, which helped create a bond between us and our student. And it was very personal. It ended up being a pretty personal experience where it wasn't just all academic. We would end up giving a bit of ourselves and even talk about backstory, and they would do the same. And perhaps it was a short time. it was a day, 4 hours in total. 4 hours a day, and we did that for 5 days. So, but for that time that we had them, we did build a connection, and if we could really see the impact, especially on the last day we left. The last day we left was pretty hard. At first, on the last day, I didn't really process the fact that it was the last day, and there was a kid, Jose, with me, and he was in a bad mood. And I wasn't sure why, and so I asked him, what's wrong? And he wouldn't tell me what's wrong. But then he would linger on my side, and I wasn't sure why. Then I realized, maybe he wants me to hug him. So I did, and he hugged me back. And I asked him again, what's wrong? And he didn't want to tell me what was wrong. And then when we were leaving, I don't know why it didn't occur to me. It didn't occur to me that the kids really valued us that much, because being there, it just surprised me, as I'm not that. Their emotions for us, or the way that they really attached himself to us was really cool to see, and it completely threw me off guard. When we were leaving, I finally clicked. Oh, he's sad because we're leaving. And yeah, and so I went and I said bye to him, and it was really hard to do. On some of the children, I think that it had the attachment that we got with some of the kids were simply because of the time we spent with them. We ended up getting close emotionally. Like I said, it was a very personal experience. But with Josue, I felt like it was something a bit more because I actually didn't spend a lot of time with him. I only really talked to him on the 2 last days that we were there. And the first time we talked, it was, it was like any other kid. We had fun and stuff. But on the last day, he suddenly said that I reminded him of his mom. And I was like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, you look like my mom. And I think that made him feel some sort of attachment to me. And it was really hard leaving him, honestly, especially after he said that it hurt. A program that comes in to a country and tries to make a change, that's a big responsibility. And something that Ardenti does that I really, really like it for is the fact that they continuously visit. So they're constantly maintaining the work that we do. I think that the cultural excursion were fairly balanced out with a student service learning process of it. In fact, I would say it was part of the student service learning process because, as I mentioned before, a big expectation I had going into Ardenti was that it would help change my perspective from sympathizing, people from generally the global south, to being more empathizing, seeing that it's more than just what we see, especially when you scholarly study areas like that. You're usually given with just cold, dry facts that make it look like I don't know if this is that make it look like a devastating place to live in almost. But these excursions show that there's so much more than just that. We were able to see just people being about and being happy. And something that surprised me was that after an excursion, we just dropped by her house, and her dad was super welcoming. We came in and he had these coconuts lined up for us and started cutting them open and giving each one of them to us, and he gave us a little tour of his house. They showed me a lot of chickens. It was very cool. My parents, they're from Mexico. If I was ever to see their house, I expect to see something like that. But it was very cool. And that moment, really shows how much more there is in comparison to things that we just read about the global south. And just seeing something like that so warm, so happy, it was really cool, especially the family unity.
Oh, look at that fish!
His name is Grind Teeth. You'll come fishing with me?
They just gave us a tour of their whole house, and it was really cool to see. We just went in there and it didn't feel at all like we were intruding because of the atmosphere they set up for us. The Mayan ruins was also a very unique experience for me because I haven't been to a place with such history behind it. And it's very amazing to see what it is that humans are capable of, especially now that we rely so much on technology. It's hard to imagine us pulling off something like that with little to nothing. It was very impressive to see. We were basically the only ones there. And at first when I saw that, I thought, oh, this is cool. We get the whole thing to ourselves. But then Jenny, one of the girls in our group, she started pointing out the fact that there's no people there. It really shows the decline that Belize has had, because in any other day you would have expected it to be full with a lot of visitors, but it wasn't. We were practically the only ones. So on the last day, we went to an island called Gofke, and that was really cool too. Dominique, that was Natalie's son, he went out fishing, and I've seen people fish before, and usually when they fish, they come out with these little gray fishies. So that's kind of what I was expecting. That was not the case. He caught some very impressive fish at some point. Most of the day was spent eating. No, not most of it. That was just a short part.
So that's what I remember.
Yeah. See, the food was really good. Natalie actually brought some of her gear so that the group could go snorkeling. When I first signed up to go to Ardenti, or to go with Ardenti, the pandemic had just started. So I ended up having to cancel 3 different times for the pandemic and also some conflicts in scheduling. And the fourth time, I finally was able to go through, and I was so happy. For one thing, I haven't been away from my parents for that long, 10 days. I was worried, but luckily, the Ardenti program, everything was programmed for you. There was everything, good hands. But then another aspect was the social aspect, because we were going to be with a group of people who didn't know me and I didn't know them. We were strangers to each other, but we were put in a situation where we had to, at least talk to each other, because we were together for 10 days. And in those 10 days, we actually started bonding, and we were growing from each other, showing each other different views. And it made me think more on the concept of just strangers in general. Not necessarily strangers, but people who you see on a day-to-day basis but don't really interact with. If given a chance, I would like to at least, right now it's kind of hard because of the pandemic, you don't really see people anymore. But back when I did, I never really tried to dive into a deeper relationship, or not even a relationship, just simply knowing more about a person. It made me want to see people more. It's because that group, they were very welcoming and super accepting, and especially the girls, because the girls, we were constantly with each other since we shared rooms for 10 days straight, and we didn't get sick of each other or anything like that. It was really nice. And in those days, like the group as a whole, we ended up bonding, and at the end of it, none of us hated each other or anything like that. I think that all of us, when we went to Ardenti, we went in really expecting a lot of what it gave, if that made sense. So none of us went to this trip thinking that it was going to be a vacation or anything like that. We all wanted to grow in some way because of that, and we all had that same passion. So sometimes after an excursion, once we were in the room, the girls, we would talk about how excited we were, or what we had just learned, or how some certain event that happened kind of like blew our minds or changed our perspective, just something that we wanted to talk about. After every night, we would get together and have a reflection where we would talk about everything that we had that day, or anything that was on our mind from that day.
And I wanted to be a social worker at some point because I like kids, and I've heard a lot of stories about some kids growing up in not the best situations, and I always wanted to fix that, and I thought social work would be the best way. And as a teacher, one thing I didn't like about the job is the code of ethics. They put a lot of restrictions on you. I want to change these kids' lives, but just because you want to change a kid's life, it doesn't mean you need to go into every little detail and control their whole family unit, their whole situation. It's not about that. And as a teacher, that what you were telling Jacob, we play a big role as it is, just simply giving them a little something more in their life. But it doesn't mean that we need to go in and fix every little thing outside of that.
And having a group where we all had that in mind, we were all able to grow from it. And although we were having the same experiences, at the end of the day, when we would talk about it, I realized that some people saw that experience a bit differently than I did. So hearing from them and hearing how they saw it was really cool. And in that way, we were able to grow together by seeing all these different perspectives and the different lenses they would use to take in whatever it is that we did that day, which is really cool. The reflections, they were very therapeutic almost. They were really cool. It was a good way to digest everything that we've had. And then certain instances that happen, they just happen, and we're like, oh, and we move on. But the reflection was a way to force ourselves to analyze that situation and gain something from it, which is the whole point of this trip. So it really helped, and doing it with each other, we're able to get feedback from what we saw so that they can help interpret whatever it is that we saw that day. And then hearing other people's reflections, we're able to see things that we've missed, and that was really cool. Coming back, there were still a lot of things that we were able to bring back with us. Although Belize is a completely different place, people there live a different reality than we do. In a lot of ways, they still intersect with other families who live in the US. And although I've never really involved myself with a community that we have here, who perhaps have economic struggles, or perhaps a family unit that's not quite traditionally held up, this trip exposed me to certain experiences that they also might be sharing with the people in Belize. Something I was expecting with Ardenti was a shift in my perspective. And the expectation was fulfilled. The growth in the way I saw people who didn't necessarily share or live the same reality that I did and live differently, how in-depth it is, because being from the US, you know, when we hear about countries who are mostly in the global south, it comes with a lot of negative connotations and just a perspective where we tend to think that they are helpless almost. And so going on this trip really helped me see that that's not the case. Just because they live in a different reality, there are still some similarities at the same time though. Going there, I was able to see their day-to-day life and how some of it was similar to my own, and it just felt so welcoming to be in a community like that. And then we said that to Jennifer, and Jennifer said that, yeah, everyone's like that. You go to someone's house and they just set up that atmosphere for you, you know. It's really cool to see. The first day when we were at IHOP, Jennifer gave us a shirt, and the back of that shirt had a quote that said, "Changing the way I see the world." And I absolutely fell in love with that quote because the implications of it, it's not like we're a godsend or something like from, you know, the USA who is coming down to this country and like fixing all the problems. It's not like that. In fact, when we go there, we do try to help. We do what we can, but of course, working under, you know, the Belizean people, under their guide, we try to assist them. But to me, at least, the bigger part of that trip was what I received from them, because I was able to see the many layers to their lives. And when I would talk to a student, I asked about some personal details, like a bit about their home life, because they wanted to talk too. So we got to know each other a little bit more, and I was able to see or get a feel for what life was like there, and it was a different reality than mine, and that was very cool to see. Ardenti Global Service Learning, changing the way I see the world. While I was there, I wanted to show, you know, because we were away from my parents, and I'm pretty attached to my family, and I wanted them to see what was going on. And so I liked the idea of documenting those 10 days. So for the 10 days, I made these short video clips, and then at the end, I deleted a whole bunch and got some of the ones I liked and put them together on a little video. Passions. It feels so weird. Okay, do I start with like a hi or do I just?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. My name is Madai Bernal. I'm a student at the UNG. Okay, I'll get into it. Started off as a small idea. Okay.
Ardenti Global Service Learning.
Okay.
Go passionate.
Okay. Ardenti Service Global Learning. Go.
Nope.
RIP feature editing Jonathan.
Oh, yes.
um,
Yep, I think we're good. Awesome.
yeah, okay.
Cut.